Chengli and the Silk Road Caravan by Hildy Kang. Chapter 1. Chang'an, China's imperial city, 630 CE. It was the wind that made Chengli decide to leave. Yellow with dust from the desert, it rolled and danced around his ears during the day and pounded black against his eyes in the night. A demon wind, it taunted him to remember places long forgotten. A spirit wind, it teased him to recall events he had never known. Yet as he guided his donkey cart through the crowded streets of Chang'an City, no wind blew. The golden banners that marked the Chinese emperor's palace lay limp against their poles. Along the canal, the leaves on the willow trees hung motionless in the spring sunshine. "Can't you hear it? Don't you feel it?" Chengli called to his partner, riding along with him in the cart. "You know, don't you, there is no wind," Little Limp shouted as he sat at the back of the cart, protecting the bolts of silk and guarding his injured foot, the one that refused to heal properly. As long as Chainley could remember, he and Little Limp had worked together for the silk merchant. When they were children, they'd been given easy jobs, for the merchant said that if they wanted to eat, they had to work. When they were 5 or 6, they used short, stubby brooms and swept out the stinking animal droppings from the stalls of the 2 donkeys until their arms ached so much they could barely lift the chopsticks to eat their rice. As they grew older and stronger, they exchanged the brooms for shovels to rid the stalls of rotten straw. Now that they were 12 and 13 and tall for their ages, the merchant trusted them to work together on the delivery cart, going back and forth daily across the great city. Little Limp pulled himself up to look over the piles of silk and to face Cheng Li. "You know nobody else feels the wind. It's a ghost wind, and it doesn't want me, it only wants you." Cheng Li jammed his fist against his ears to block out the sound of the wind. "It's driving me crazy." "Maybe it's not wind at all," said Little Limp, spreading his fingers and waving his arms wildly. "It's demon breath." "Yee!" he yelled in his best demon voice. "It's a desert demon from the far, far north. Maybe it's trying to pull you back there. Isn't that where you were born? Isn't that where your father died? Maybe the demons know something. Maybe—" Little Limp's voice trailed off as Chengli leaped up and pounded the air. "I, demon from the desert!" Chengli shouted. "Show yourself! Let me fight you fair and square!" Little Limp grinned. He was used to his older friend's bursts of temper, especially when things didn't seem right. And a demon that hid in the wind was not right. Not at all. "You can't fight the wind," he called to Cheng Li. Cheng Li relaxed, gave his donkey a swat, and thought about what Little Limp had said. A demon wind calling him to the desert? That couldn't be right. He planned to stay right where he was. He loved this imperial city of Chang'an, all laid out in its perfect square, with the main streets going straight across in each direction and leading to the gate in each of the 4 walls. Off the busy main streets, smaller streets and alleys twisted and curved, and Chengli knew every one of them. He knew the filthy alleys to the south and the elegant stone-paved streets surrounding the emperor's palace near the north wall. He watched for a glimpse of the emperor or even a prince or princess, but he'd never seen them. Instead, he gave his attention to the silk that he delivered, the cart that carried it, even the old donkey that pulled the cart. Little Limp was smart enough for a young kid, thought Ching Li, but he must be wrong about that horrible wind. Yet maybe. Ching Li thought about all the years he and Little Limp had worked together for bald-headed merchant Yan, the wealthiest silk merchant in the city. He thought about all the talk he heard as he walked back and forth through the city. Men spoke of how this year, the 5th year in the reign of the Emperor Taizong, promised to be a good year for merchants. And if it was good for merchants, it would be good for the caravans carrying their wares. "Maybe," Cheng Lei said out loud, "maybe it's time I left the city to follow the spirit wind so I can find out what it wants from me." They passed through the opening in the wall that surrounded the vast East Market and made their way through the familiar puzzle of narrow alleys, past small shops selling everything from salt to timber, from precious jewels to horses, and one, Changli's favorite, that sold 24 different kinds of dumplings. He urged his donkey around the mats laid out on the ground on which peddlers had set their wares. When the 2 boys reached the stalls that clustered together in the street where fabrics were sold, they delivered the bolts of silk to those merchants who had the emperor's permission to sell the precious material. and then they headed for their last delivery of the day, at a caravan parked in the field outside the high stone wall of the city. Chengli climbed up on Old Donkey's bare back, and he guided the cart along dusty streets, past the bell tower with its huge bronze bell that rang the curfew at night and the opening of the city gates in the morning. They continued across town past the drum tower, and then, nodding to the soldier on duty, out through the archway in the massive red brick gate to the grassy field where the caravans gathered. Everywhere across the field, the rugged men who worked the caravans had pitched their small tents or thrown their blanket rolls down on the ground to claim their spots. They had tethered their camels and donkeys and now stood arguing and bargaining in the confusion of sounds and smells, voices, snorts, and bellows. Soon these men would load their string of camels with thousands of precious items and begin the long trek to the northwest along the route used by the huge trade caravans. Out there somewhere, they would leave the protection of China's Great Wall and head west around the edge of the fearful desert until they reached a city called Kashgar. That's the place, Chengli had heard, where hundreds of caravans from far distant lands came together to buy and sell everything, exchanging their loads for new things and then turning around and returning the way they had come. The caravan men told him nothing about the far lands, for they'd never been there and didn't believe the stories they were told. The mountains blocking the way north, west, and south were so high and cold that no camel could cross them, and only magical horses brought loads down out of the snow. Such lands, Chengli knew, were protected by ghosts and demons and dragons, not the friendly river dragons of the Middle Kingdom, but ferocious dragons of the sand and snow. And the men told of the demons in the billowing clouds that hung over the highest mountains, often pushing their clouds down so low that caravans fell over the cliffs into the chasms below. Only the bravest men could face such unknown terrors. Moving on through the crowded field, Chengli wrinkled his nose against the overwhelming stench of so many camels, while his slender body bounced to the rhythmic rustle of bells and bangles that hang from the camels' saddles. Men yelled, camels hummed, ropes slapped, and workers adjusted their loads of silk, spices, tea, and pottery to take to the lands beyond the mountains. Chengli worked his way across the field until he saw the blue and white banner that identified his assigned caravan master and brought his cart to a stop. Little Limp jumped down off the back of the cart, lost his balance, and fell to the ground at the feet of the master. Chengli leaped off the donkey and dropped to his hands and knees next to his partner in respect for the caravan master. Stand, the man ordered. What have you brought me? Chengli held out a thin wooden paddle covered with writing, the record of silk to be delivered. As workers unloaded the heavy rolls of fabric, the master checked each bolt for the Imperial seal that marked it as having been inspected and approved for sale. 50 bolts of plain white silk, counted the caravan master, and 50 bolts of silk woven in colorful patterns approved for trade. Satisfied, he recorded the delivery on the wooden paddle and handed it back. Chengli took the paddle, slipped it under the rope that served as his belt, and tied it securely. He pulled his rough brown tunic tighter over his shoulders, and with a yank at Old Donkey's rope, turned back toward the city. Leading the donkey through the crowded streets of Chang'an, he jostled against the people and animals that filled every available space. Street cleaners and peddlers shoved aside cows, cats, and children as they wandered in all directions. Porters carried their wares on wooden yokes across their shoulders, and thin old men in long tattered robes coughed a constant "Move, move" to their heavily loaded mules. The enticing aromas of soup and spices twisted in and out among the sharper smells of people and animals, body sweat and manure. People came to Chang'an from faraway places, countries from beyond those magical clouds that hid the mountains beyond the desert, to trade with the Middle Kingdom. The people who came to Chang'an looked different and sounded different. They came with black hair, red hair, curly hair, long beards, no beards, brown eyes, blue eyes. None of them pulled their hair up into top knots the way all the Middle Kingdom people did. All except Cheng Li, of course, as his hair had been shaved off by old cook, and it was just growing long again. He didn't like to talk about that. He did, however, like to watch the foreigners. They talked with words strange to the ear and ate food strange in taste and smell. Chengli loved this part of the city, the Western Market, and he always slowed the cart to look at the silver and gold jewelry and the woven straw baskets filled with dried fish and a smell so strong it made Chengli's nose crinkle long before he even got near them. He listened to the women bargaining to get the cheapest price, watched the herb seller mixing medicines with strange sounding names, and stopped to gaze at the piles of vegetables he knew and those he feared even to touch. But today the sights and sounds made him feel restless. I've worked these streets every day of my life for the past 4 years, Chengli said to Little Limp, who was sitting behind him on the now empty cart. It's the only home I know, but I think you are right. The desert is calling me. I was born out there somewhere, where the grass and trees disappear and nothing is left except rock and sand and mountains. I've heard about it forever from old Cook because she still tells me stories my mother once told her. And now I want to see it. I'm old enough to work in one of the caravans heading out along the trade route. With them, I can travel in safety. Caravans don't need skinny boys. They need men, Little Limp teased. You'll have to fight bandits, real bandits, and ghosts as thick as desert sands. He shivered and put his hands over his eyes. And there are demons out there, real ones, prowling along the tops of the mountains and sliding down through the clouds to catch careless travelers. I've heard people say the trails along the edge of the desert are lined with bones of people eaten by those hungry desert spirits. Cheng Li's voice tightened. Maybe you're right, he said. I am skinny, but I'm tall and I'm strong. And don't you notice? Caravans come and go all the time. Most people survive, even if my own parents didn't. If your father died out there, Little Lip said, Old Cook must know where he's buried. Old Cook doesn't know. Maybe my father never was buried. Then maybe he never really died. What do you mean? Chengli asked. Old Cook says he died. Bandits came, father disappeared, and Cook says the bandits always kill their prisoners. Do you remember your father at all? No, but lately I've been thinking about him, Chengli said as he ran his hands through his tousled hair and gazed off into the distance. I know he worked as one of the inspector generals for the government, checking the packs that the caravans bring in and out of our land, making sure they have correct passport, making sure they carry just what their documents listed and nothing more. Old Cook says father was brave and honest. He never lied and he never took bribes. Chengli turned the cart toward their home and continued, I have no idea what he was really like, and the older I get, the more I wonder. The only thing I do know is that in order for him to become an inspector, he had to pass the government exam, and to do that, he had to know how to read and write. His family must have been rich to pay for his teacher. So I know he wasn't a low class serf, a servant like me, but I don't know anything else at all about him. I do wonder what he was like. Am I like my father? I'll never know. But maybe somebody out there knew him. Maybe somebody can tell me more about him. Little Limp scooted forward in the empty cart. How did you get here if you were born out there? The story old Cook tells is that when mother got sick, she managed to join a caravan so she could bring me back to our city, Chang'an. She gave me to old Cook, and then she died. Changli shook his head, lost in his own thoughts. He guided the cart around a fountain and over the great stone bridge until they finally reached the high stone walls of Merchant Yan's house. They passed the main entrance with its heavy carved wood doors and pushed open the smaller gate that led to the servants' area. A long corridor led to an open courtyard, where, along the outer wall, stood the rooms to house the servants, animals, storage, and tools. They stopped at all the stalls for their donkey and cart. Little Limp jumped down and unhitched old donkey. People say, Little Limp began. I don't care what people say. I want to join a caravan. Chingly grabbed a handful of straw and scraped at the donkey's back and sides to clean off the dust of the city, until the old animal pulled away from such rough treatment. Wrinkling his brow in thought, Chingli dropped the straw. I was born in the year of the tiger. I must be as fierce and as strong as tigers. Little Limp looked puzzled. How will you get free from your contract to work for Merchant Yan? He asked. He won't want to lose such cheap labor. It doesn't cost him much to feed kids like us. I won't even try, Cheng Li said. I'll just leave. He headed off across the courtyard to the building that served as a kitchen for all the servants. But as he walked, he thought about old Cook, and he knew he could not leave without telling her. She had cared for him all these years, and he owed her honor and respect. She was the only person who really cared about him at all, and he must tell her about his plans. His thoughts flew this way and that way, searching for the best way to tell her. He walked to the door of the kitchen and stopped. The aroma of sweet cooked rice filled the dingy, dirt floor room. blending with the savory smell of sizzling onions. Chengli always thought that frying onions must be the most delicious smell in the world, and it usually made him stop at the doorway and give the proper greeting. I have returned, honorable auntie, followed by something sure smells good in here. Tonight, however, he stood silently in the shadows and watched his old cook bent low, pushing branches into the opening of the stone fire bench. She was more like a mother to him, scolding or chiding him when he needed it, listening quietly when he had fits of anger or sadness, or caring for him when he got sick. So he knew that if he really wanted to leave Chang'an, he had to start here. He blinked his large brown eyes, sucked in a quick breath, let it out slowly, and stepped out of the shadows. Well, old cook said, looking up with a toothless grin, you are quiet tonight. What's on your mind, young one? Auntie, I have to tell you something. Cheng Li walked around to where the old woman, her skin thinner than wrinkled rice paper, expertly ladled steaming food from a large black kettle into a row of bowls lined up on the serving board. Today I watched caravans prepare to leave Chang'an. He dug his toes into the dirt and tried again. I want to go with them. Old cook kept ladling out rice with one hand and brushed the sweat off her face with the other. You've said that every autumn and every spring since you've been old enough to talk. Chengli gulped for air and talked faster. Auntie, somewhere in my mind there are bits and pieces of another life, of horses and camels, heat and wind. I am now in my 13th year, old enough to go find that life. Old cook looked up and stared at him. You? Go into the desert? Ha! Demons will eat you in one bite. The old woman cackled at her own joke. Demons don't eat Caravan Man, and they won't eat me. Men, you're young and soft, just right for demon food. And if those spirits don't get you, the wild winds will blow you away. The winds will tear you to shreds and float you back to me in little specks of yellow dust. The woman turned again to the rice pot, shivering at her thoughts of unknown terrors. Chengli swallowed hard. He really hadn't seen a caravan worker as young as he, but he wasn't going to let old cook discourage him. She got scared just peeking at the streets outside her own gate. A heavy silence stretched to fill the room. Then slowly Cook turned from the stove to face Cheng Li. Your poor mother gave you to me. She begged me to raise you as my own son. I promised her when she lay dying. Her voice shrilled. What are you saying? That I'd break a deathbed promise? All the ghosts of all the dead in the Middle Kingdom will come and steal my spirit if I break my promise. Cheng Li clenched his fist to help him keep his mouth shut and nodded his thanks for his rice bowl. He sat down on the bench and watched the other workers come in for their suppers. Eating slowly, he finished his rice and then walked back across the room to stand near old cook. His words were ready now. Auntie, you've done what my mother asked. You are a mother to me. You've cared for me all these years, but I don't have to live here. The ghost wind is making me crazy. I have to go with the caravans and chase that wind to see if my memories are real. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe I'll find someone who can tell me about my father. Your father? Old Cook swung around and grabbed Chingley by the shoulders, shaking him. I've told you a million times. Bandits killed your father. Do you want bandits to kill you too? Chingley's head bobbed wildly, and his unruly shaggy hair flopped into his eyes as Old Cook took out her fear on his body. Now he knew for sure that she loved him like a real mother, but he had to finish what he started. Not everybody gets killed by bandits. He brushed the hair off his face and flung his arms out wide. People come this way and go that way and come and go again and again. I know it. I see them, the same people. When I take the silk out to the caravans, I will come back. I'll come back and tell you about all the strange and marvelous things that I've seen. Go then, you ungrateful mutt. Go right now. Old Cook grabbed a piece of firewood and turned toward him, beating the air. Changli dropped his rice bowl and ducked outside, grinning right down to his toes. He had the permission he needed.